Hey everyone, have you ever really stopped to think about what's going on in a classroom? I mean, really, what makes it all work? It feels simple, right? A teacher, some students. But underneath all that, there's a hidden system, an invisible architecture that powers all teaching. And today, we're going to pull back that curtain.
So, let's start with the most basic question. What is teaching? When we picture it, we usually see this simple two-way street. You've got the teacher on one end and the student on the other, a simple back and forth. But what if that whole picture is missing the most important piece?
You know, anyone just rushing by would see that simple binary view on the left. Teacher, student, done. But the science of teaching, what we call didactics, tells us that's a huge mistake. The real picture is a triangle. It's not just the teacher and the student, there's a third, absolutely crucial element, the knowledge itself.
And this quote just nails it perfectly. Trying to understand teaching by ignoring the knowledge is like trying to explain a concert by ignoring the music. It makes no sense, right? You'd be watching a pianist move their hands and just wondering why everyone is so into it. The knowledge is the music of the classroom.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll talk more about that third element. Then we'll dive deep into this idea of the didactic triangle. We'll take a quick trip through history to see how the focus has shifted, uncover the unwritten rules of the classroom, and finally, look at the crazy way knowledge gets transformed into a lesson.
All right, let's get right into it and officially introduce that third player to the game.
The official term for this whole framework is didactics. You can think of it as the art and science of teaching. And its single most important idea is this: teaching is never a duo. It is always a trio. A dynamic dance between the teacher, the student, and the knowledge.
And the best way to visualize that dance is with the core model for today, the didactic triangle.
So let's break down the 3 points. First, you've got the student. Obviously, they're the whole reason we're even here. Then you've got the knowledge, the actual what of the lesson. And finally, you have the teacher, whose job is to be the bridge, to connect that student to that knowledge in a meaningful way.
But you might be thinking, wait, people share information all the time. What makes a classroom different? Well, it's this right here, didactic intent. This isn't just accidental sharing, it's the specific, focused intention to teach. That intent is the engine that gets the whole triangle spinning.
Okay, so these 3 points are always there. But what's really fascinating is that throughout history, different thinkers have put the spotlight on different corners of the triangle. The balance of power has really shifted over time.
Now, this debate has been going on for centuries, but things really get heated in the 1800s with a guy named Herbart, and then the huge counter-argument from John Dewey in the 1900s. This is where the real battle for the soul of the classroom begins. So first up, there was a long period where all the focus, all the attention was on one corner of that triangle, the teacher.
Johann Friedrich Herbart, who's often called the father of didactics, was all about this. For him, teaching was about the teacher's plans, the teacher's activities, the teacher's vision. He even came up with a famous 5-step method for teaching anything. It was a system that put the teacher firmly in control. But, you know, for every action, there's a reaction. And that super teacher-focused view was eventually challenged in a big way. The spotlight swung dramatically over to a different corner, to the learner.
And the person leading that charge was John Dewey. He looked at the old model and said, "You've got it all wrong. It's not about teaching, it's about learning." He was the champion of learning by doing, of problem solving. For Dewey, the student wasn't a passive receiver. They were the active center of the entire educational universe.
Okay, so we've got our 3 players, teacher, student, knowledge. But how do they actually interact with each other? Well, that's governed by something called the didactic contract. Think of it as the hidden rules of the game. And this contract comes in 2 flavors. First, there's the implicit or unspoken stuff. You know, things like being on time, respecting each other, the stuff we just assume. But then there's the explicit contract, the rules the teacher lays out loud and clear. This is the grading policy. Here are your deadlines.
And here's why this is so important. Once a teacher makes that explicit contract, they have to honor it. If they suddenly change the rules halfway through, say a project that was worth 20% of the grade is now worth 50%, it breaks the trust. It creates what's called a didactic problem, where the student who is playing by the rules feels totally blindsided and cheated by the system.
All right, our final piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about the knowledge itself. Because knowledge doesn't just walk into a classroom ready to be taught. It has to go through this really amazing transformation first. It's a process called didactic transposition.
It all starts with what we call scholarly knowledge, the super dense, complex research papers and academic books that were never written for a beginner. The teacher then takes that raw material and works some magic. They deconstruct it, they simplify it, and they rebuild it into something that can actually be learned. And what comes out the other end is the taught knowledge, the lesson you see in class.
So get this. A teacher isn't just a delivery person dropping off a package of facts. No way. A teacher is more like an artisan, skillfully reshaping raw material into something that's not just understandable, but useful and valuable. Teaching is a creative act of transformation.
So as we wrap up, what are the big things to remember? 1. Teaching is always a three-way relationship: teacher, student, knowledge. 2. The didactic triangle is your new superpower for analyzing any learning situation. And 3. A teacher's real job is way deeper than just talking. It's about managing hidden rules and transforming knowledge itself.
So, I'll leave you with a final thought. Now that you can see this hidden system, this architecture behind the scenes, how does that change the way you look back on your own time in a classroom? Whether you were a student or a teacher, what new things do you see now that you know about the triangle, the contract, and the transformation? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.